So last time, you may guys recall, we did a long piece talking about how if you are absolutely certain about your faith, then it almost verges on idolatry. That, in a sense, faith is a series of words and ideas that are how we understand God and the world, and that's really important. But as long as we're not open to the possibility that we might be wrong, that means we're also not open to God in some sense. We're not open to God teaching us something new. Um, so from that, I want to move on to piece number two. So I'm going to share my screen. Source number two, which is going to talk about this same distinction between faith and ideology we touched on last time. And it's like not the same idea, but taking this slightly different direction, let's say. This is from Veriti Shalom, which is a new book that came out just in Elul on like Israeli politics and war and the state and stuff. So this piece is from a discussion of the disengagement from Gaza, the Hitnakut, and the opposition to it. And he just talk about like some of the people who are opposed to the Hitnakut, who thinks they're doing so for ideological reasons, and some for out of real emunah. This is my impression of some of the people. I realized there's a word here that makes sense. There's some of the long people. So I don't remember what that was in Hebrew. That's a mistranslation of some sort. My impression of some of the people opposing the disengagement is that in contrast to their thoroughly ideological rabbis, they are driven by authentic faith. And this is what makes them so dangerous. So we touched on this a little bit last time. The ideology for Rav Shagar means ideas and words and ways of describing things and ways of formulating truth about reality, about God, etc., that maybe made sense when you formulated it, but at a certain point you started holding on to it, onto the words and the ideas that made sense without asking if they still make sense. So one of his examples is the idea that mitzvot somehow express our inner self as Jews, and that is some form of freedom that is when we're really true to ourselves and act authentically, we just do mitzvot. This is an idea from Rav Kook. It's like that made perfect sense when Rav Kook said it, because Rav Kook grew up at the first half of the 20th century, end of the 19th century. He learned in Volozhin. For him, when he was true to his inner self, that way just mitzvot came out of him. That's what happened. But like lots and lots of Jews today, if they were sort of true to who they are internally and acted totally sort of authentically, they wouldn't do mitzvot. He has a story kind of published a couple of places in his writings. Rav Shagar talks about being on a panel with other Rosh Yeshivat Hesder. He's like, if you guys really took seriously this idea of Chovesh HaKodesh, the holy freedom of a cook, like you would be encouraging your students to go to India, because that's what they do when they say, what do I want to do authentically? I want to go to India. So after yeshiva, after the army, huge amounts of Israelis leave and go there, travel in the East. He says that's not like them betraying their inner selves. That's them being authentic. And so when we talk about like who a Jew is inside and what freedom is and the connection between freedom and mitzvot, we can't just keep saying the same old things Rav Kook said. We have to recognize that like reality is different. Those words don't make sense anymore the way they once did. So that's sort of the difference between ideology and faith, is that faith is attentive to what's happening in this moment, the reality inside me and in the world outside me, as opposed to ideology, which is like maybe made sense at one point, but it's really now frozen in the past. Okay, Akiva.
Isn't that, I guess, the way I've always like thought about when like when I hear Rav Kook say like, "Oh, be yourself," like that means like as a Jew, meaning that's like that's like a common denominator between Jews, whether born in who learned in like Volozhin, who learned in like a modern Orthodox high school, or like who grew up like secular. That's always like, that's being like true to yourself. But I mean, I guess, and I don't know if there's really even a question, but it seems like Rav Shagar is like talking about what it means to be true to yourself is to be like what your culture is, or how you grew up, or where you grew up, not necessarily like a internal like metaphysical thing.
Right. There's absolutely a difference between them. Is that Rav Kook is much more comfortable affirming and even asserting the existence of something inside us that's there, even if we can't point to it, we don't know where, like we don't recognize it. He's very explicit in many pieces about like sometimes reality as you perceive it is not the realist reality. There's something realer behind that. So he talks about a really good example is that like look, you look at the world and it seems like there's lots of things, right? That the world is multiple. It's made up of like lots and lots and lots and lots of things. And you have to learn to get beyond the world you see and recognize there's just one thing, God, right? So that sense of you have to get beyond the world you see is like a big disagreement between Rav Kook and Rav Shagar. As much as Rav Shagar sees himself as like the truest student of Rav Kook, you can't get past that distinction, which is that Rav Shagar is not willing to compromise on reality as we experience it. Yeah,
So Rav Shagar would say that like it was like it's like a good or like admirable thing for guys to like go to India after yeshiva or the army. Like he thinks that is being true to themselves.
well, he's saying it is being true to themselves, and so he has some places where he would seem to suggest that like maybe that is good because that's being true to themselves, and he has other places where he says no, if we realize that being true to ourselves doesn't automatically lead to mitzvot, maybe we need to stop talking about like, oh, the reason to do mitzvot is because it's self-expression. Maybe we should talk about like other ways of understanding mitzvot. That like maybe the idea of obedience is somehow important. Maybe the idea of like mitzvot as our language that shape us and shape the world as we experience it and like are important. Maybe like God rests in actions more than in our inner feelings, things like that. He's got a lot of different suggestions that are all an attempt really to, in that sense, find an alternative to the idea of mitzvot as self-expression, because once he realizes that doesn't work, he needs to find something else that explains mitzvot. I can tell you, like personally, that was one thing I really struggled with as a student at Orayta. Was like I never felt like mitzvot were a form of self-expression. Like doing mitzvot somehow expressed who I was on the inside, even if I believed in them, it made lots of sense, lots of good reasons to do them. I never felt a sense of like self-expression involved. So finding that in Rav Shagar was very meaningful to me. Okay.
Yeah. Sorry, could you clarify why the Rav Shagar was like meaningful to you because of like the fact that you didn't find that as like a meaningful expression of who you really were? I didn't understand that.
Well, this is like a more personal point than explaining Rav Shagar whatsoever. But like I spent 2 years as a student at Orayta and like 4 years total, including my time as a madrich. And there's a lot of talk about like mitzvot are a form of self-expression. And when I was in my time, I was like a big chassid of Rav Aaron. I was very connected to his Torah, but like always struggled with that point, and like could never get past it, never get my head around it, never made any sense to me. And it wasn't like a big deal. Like ultimately, okay, so I don't do that, but like it was bothering me to like feel like, okay, I disagree with Rav Kook on this. And so it was nice to find like Rav Shagar saying, no, it's okay to disagree with Rav Kook on this. In fact, it might make sense to disagree with Rav Kook on this. Real yeshiva dot for me. So second paragraph here. What makes the religious terrorist dangerous is that he lacks faith. Right? And so he's going to, this is building off the end of the last sentence where he says some people who oppose disengagement are driven by authentic faith, and it's this authentic faith that makes them dangerous. What makes the religious terrorist dangerous? And here he's, I think, shifting to talking about Islamic terrorism, but it is in context of Jews as well, right? Because he's talking about the people who oppose the disengagement are Jews. What makes the religious terrorist dangerous is that he lacks a lack of faith, right? He lacks doubt. This lack is what enables him to murder. Being absolutely convinced of your faith can lead you to murder. Rav Shagar says elsewhere, like the test of true faith in some sense is your willingness to be killed for it, and on a more intense level, even kill for it. Like that's real faith. That's not a flaw in faith per se. That's what faith leads to. That's what you need doubt. Paradoxically, lacking faith protects a person from transgression. The ideology of a person the ideologue who lacks faith, in contrast, is plagued by a hole that he attempts to overcome through ideology. That's the hole without a W. I'm sorry, this translation could really use some editing. The ideologue who lacks faith, in contrast, is plagued by a hole, H-O-L-E, that he attempts to overcome through ideology, and that is what makes him dangerous. But in general, he will not go too far and will find formulation justifications, even ideological ones, to prevent himself from transgressing. So, with regards to ideology, is when we hold on to words and ideas without being concerned about like how much they match who we are inside, how much they match and express what we really feel, is something that you can cling to tightly in the absence of like inner truth, right? So someone who says, like, we have to keep mitzvot because they express who you are inside. You have to keep mitzvot because, I don't know. What was I saying? I think it's examples of ideology, but you should keep mitzvot because they are the only way to mimitake in all the olamot, and because the mitzvot map onto the different limbs of your body, and you have to complete a tikkun with each and every one of them. Those are ideas, and they might be right. But one way that people use ideas is in the absence of inner feeling, right? I'm not driven to do this internally, so I'm going to explain why it's necessary. And based on the explanation, I do it. And Rav Shagar is saying that some people work based off those words and explanations, and that means they're basically going to follow the rules. They're going to use those justifications and explanations for why they should do something, why they should do mitzvot, and that will keep you from transgressing. As opposed to, if you say, I'm going to be driven purely based on my own emunah, based on my own sort of inner experience, that can lead you outside of any rules. So that's lead you to murder in this context, but this is the same sort of idea that drives towards Avera Lishma, the idea that if I feel like God wants me to do this, I'm going to do it regardless of the rules. Like there's a sense in which all halacha, as like laws given in the past, might be considered a form of ideology, as opposed to my like relationship with God in the present. And that's very much like what the Meshiloach is getting at with the idea of Vera Lishma, is like your relationship to God in the present is more important than following like ideology and the rules that were set down in the past. So Rav Shagar is saying that there's a sense of doubt, of challenging your own inner experience, and saying that my inner faith is maybe I shouldn't go with it 100%. I shouldn't just work based off of my own like inner connection with God. I should have a little bit of doubt that makes me question that. Maybe that's a good thing. Yeah. Like,
Yeah, I guess I'm not sure I fully understand. Meaning that, like, it says that the ideology who lacks faith, in contrast, is plagued by a hole that he attempts to overcome through ideology, and that is what makes him dangerous. But didn't he just say that you need to have that? What makes a terrorist dangerous is that he lacks a lack of faith. So aren't they saying totally different things?
Right. So this is some of this is unclear because my translation needs to be edited again, but some of it's unclear because Rav Shagar goes back and forth in the course of this paragraph. What makes the religious terrorist dangerous is that he lacks a lack of faith, he lacks doubt. This lack is what enables him to murder. Paradoxically, lacking faith protects a person from transgression. Okay, so that's one thing. There's the religious person who is what's called like, or the person who is a religious terrorist who lacks a lack of faith. He's driven by a deep, authentic faith. That person needs doubt in order to sort of hold himself back. In contrast, there's the ideologue who's not driven based on his own internal experiences. He's driven by his emotions and an inner feeling of faith. And so with that person, the ideologue is driven by ideas rather than being driven by his own inner experience of faith. And the ideologue, because he has a hole Hole, no W. Then he is going to essentially follow the rules. He has these rules that guide him. In contrast to the person of faith who's driven so strongly by what he feels inside that he might very well break all rules, including murder. Which is essentially, if you're a person of like faith, murder is one of the big ones. There's no faith that allows murder, like as a general rule. But being like obviously specific context, like milchemet mitzvah or something allows killing. But people will regularly violate the rules of their own faith in the name of faith, because faith can be a powerful internal driver. And so Rav Shagar is saying, in order to stop that from happening, you have to have a little bit of doubt, where you are willing to say, okay, maybe what I feel is right might actually not be right. I still think it's right, but maybe not. Akiva, you raise your hand. Okay.
I was gonna maybe ask about like what is he like asking for someone like psychologically to like just, is it more of just like admitting that they could be wrong, or like I don't know what that means. If someone's like so convinced they're right, like what does that mean if someone tells you you can't be fully right? What is that gonna help, like if they're
right? So I think it you're right that it's hard to tell people who are really very deeply passionately convinced that they're right that they should be open to the possibility that they're wrong. I think it's something we need to work on as a society. It doesn't have to make you less passionate on the whole. It does mean to make you more aware about the limits of your belief. I think about it in terms of the technical term is like second order beliefs, which is beliefs about my beliefs, right? So to be certain about something is not just to know that thing or think that thing. It's to have a sense that my belief in that thing is itself correct, right? I have a belief about my belief. I believe that my belief in God is correct. So my belief in God is one thing, and it can be deeply, deeply passionate without my belief in God being absolute. I believe in God, but separate from my own belief in God, I know that I'm a human being. I'm limited. I make mistakes. So my belief in God that I think is absolutely correct could also be mistaken. And I think it's on that level that Rav Shagar wants us to be more open to doubt, is on the level of not maybe there should be less of my faith of what I'm feeling, but I should frame that faith within context of like I'm human and limited and make mistakes. We must thus open up to the lack of faith, to the ability to cast doubt, to the ironic distanced gaze. And irony, very similar to that I was just getting at, irony is an idea from Kierkegaard that Rav Shagar likes to use, which means essentially maintaining two contradictory ideas at the same time. I believe, but also I'm aware that I could be wrong. And I believe those things simultaneously, and that's okay. Rav Shagar has a funny image. He calls it seeing with both your eyes at once, as if you had like one believing eye and one doubtful eye, being willing to use both of them at once. Is such a gaze opposed to fear of heaven, Yirat Shamayim? Not necessarily. In a certain situation, it itself is the fear of heaven, or at least it enables a powerful possibility of the fear of heaven. And there's actually a greater Yirat Shamayim that comes from recognizing my own limitations and the importance of doubt. That's all. Like the importance of the ability to doubt while also believing. In fact, it creates the possibility for Yirat Shamayim. I think part of what's important for that is I think two levels of understanding this. One is this humility involved, and like all Yirat Shamayim has to involve humility, and so the humility in recognizing your own limits is important. But also Yirat Shamayim for Rav Shagar is like first and foremost not trying to force yourself onto the situation. Being like recognizing the way things are, and like Yirat Shamayim from the language of like Yira from the language of Ro'eh, from seeing, right? Obviously not the actual root of Yira, but they're related. And Rav Shagar talks about Yirat Shamayim as recognizing the presence of God within our world and within reality as it happens to us, whether God is like, panentheistic presence or just, hashgacha, God controlling things. And so this language of this idea that doubt opens us up to Yirat Shamayim, I think returns us to what we talked about last time about the willingness to hear something new from reality and see God's hand in events in a way that doesn't just fit our predetermined ideas. That having a little bit of doubt, almost as it were, almost puts an asterisk over our belief in such a way that we're willing to we're open to the possibility of change. We don't have to actively seek out alternatives because we still do believe, but also open to new possibilities. All right. Thoughts, questions? Ellie, you're chewing something over?
Yeah, to be honest, I'm a little confused.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm happy to clarify.
Yeah. I guess maybe that's the nature of the paradox of what he's trying to say, but I still don't understand the contrast in the purple and green. They just feel completely opposed to each other. I know you explained it once to me already, but I'm not sure it makes sense yet.
Well, the opposite could be completely opposed to them. I mean, there's two different models. Oh, so there's the person of faith and the ideologue.
Okay.
The person of faith, and that's what he's trying to be metaking in this piece. He's trying to say that there's normally, and we saw in the last piece, he contrasts faith and ideology, and he wants to criticize ideology, as we saw last class. This class, he wants to criticize faith. He says that faith itself can also be, as much as last time he was talking about ideology, can be too much. You have to be willing to be open yourself up to real faith instead of ideology, and be willing to let your ideology be wrong. He's pointing out that you could be driven purely by what you're feeling internally, which is sort of the opposite of ideology, and that could still be dangerous. So that's the contrast between purple and green. Purple is the person of faith who is so driven internally that they can veer into dangerous areas, and ideology is in green, which is okay, you're generally you're going to follow some set of rules at least. You won't end up probably want to murdering someone.
Okay, fine. I got
so
it.
then we return to trying to be metaking the purple, the religion of the person of faith, and the answer is some level of doubt. Putting an asterisk even on your own internal experience of faith. And Rav Shagar is saying instead of that being almost an anti-religious position on some level, we should see it as opening us up to Yirat Shamayim, in the sense of both humility and in the sense of a humble position before reality, before what happens, a willingness to see God as a determining factor in existence. And in some sense, if we're committed purely to our own sort of internal experience of faith, then we're going to miss out on God in reality, God in the world outside us. Make sense? More questions? And this is not an easy piece, particularly not given the errors in my translation, but not in general. We're going to hit this paradox even harder in this last paragraph here. We're going to start by invoking the Moreh, the Moreh. God is not a fact. He exists without existence. In the first place, in the Moreh, I want to say Nun Daled, maybe Nun Bet, somewhere around there. God Nimtza v'lo b'mitziut in the Hebrew. He exists without existence. Existence is a human thing. The word we use to define how things are in reality, that doesn't apply to God. God is not some simple fact about reality or in reality. This is the secret of the Tzimtzum, which is also the source of a lack of faith, as Rabbi Nachman teaches. Right? The Tzimtzum is the source of doubt for Rabbi Nachman. Yeah, Ellie.
Isn't it interesting that he juxtaposes the Moreh with Tzimtzum?
Yeah, It is. In a sense, Rabbi Nachman ties that paradox together because Rabbi Nachman, like speaks about Tzimtzum and stuff, but is also the one who Rabbi Nachman both told his Chassidim not to study philosophy at all, and the Mora in specifically, and also very clearly read the Mora and probably lots of other like medieval Rishonim philosophy and stuff. Like it's very clear that he was deeply engaged with the Mora. But on another level, I think there's something like very sensible about it. So what's happening in Nimtza V'lo B'Mitziut, right? There's a like even in the Mora, you're affirming something about as like a back and forth movement. You're saying something about God and then saying the opposite. You're like the fancy academic language. You're unsaying it, saying and unsaying, and that's like some of the whole project of the Rambam is in the sort of it's called negative theology. The idea of describing God in the negative or being negation. And part of that is not just like, oh, that's the in a sense cleanest way to describe God, right? We're going to strip away all of the things that are wrong. There's also a paradox there because the Rambam is actually going to very strongly assert certain things about God, right? God is the knower, the knowing, and the known, and the unity of those things, right? That's a fairly strong statement to make about God. Right next to chapters where he's talking about how you can't say anything about God. And so Rambam is like open to that paradox. Machloket Parshanim on the Rambam, like how to understand that. But one way is the same sort of idea that Rabbi Nachman's going to get at with the Tzimtzum, which is that there are just different like facts about human existence. One of which is we can know certain things about God or about our reality that look like God is the knower, the knowing, and the known. And the other side is like a deep skepticism about the possibility of us really knowing anything about God. And like those are both true. Yeah, and the reference to Rabbi Nachman here is to Torah Samach Dalet, the 64th teaching in the first chelik of the Likutei Moharan, which talks about the Tzimtzum as creation of a space where God isn't, right? The space where it makes sense to doubt because there's no God there. But simultaneously, Rabbi Nachman says, but the Tzimtzum is just impossible because nothing could exist without God. So therefore, it must be a space within which God both exists and does not exist. And that paradox runs into like it's a contradiction. We cannot possibly believe a contradiction. It's a limit on human knowledge. Or for Shagar, it's a limit in our human language. That language is how we think and can't include contradiction. And so that's where doubt comes from. There's some doubts that are inherent in language for Rav Shagar, in like any sort of human thinking, because the problem of faith, right? Both the problem of there being something other than God is not something our human language can comprehend in this framing, and therefore, like it automatically creates doubt. The internal logic is simple. God is not a fact, so how is it possible to believe in him? Right? Once we say that believing is sort of affirming the existence of a thing, God is not a thing that exists in the same way anything else exists. So affirming God's existence is not the same as affirming the existence of the chair you're sitting on. Right? It's somehow fundamentally different. It doesn't make any sense. How can you believe in not a fact? Right? In a sense, if we return to the negative descriptions of the Rambam, at a certain point you say, if you just keep saying God isn't this, God isn't that, you've just said God is nothing. How can you keep saying God is this thing that's composed entirely of negative statements? How? The answer is that you must conscript the lack of faith in the service of the cause. You have to draft doubt in service of faith. Believe without believing, just as God exists without existence. Or believe without belief, just as God exists without existence. Willingness to, I think it's a fun phrase, that obscures a little bit what he's getting at. I think he means what we were talking about before, is the willingness to believe while also recognizing your limits of your own belief. There's serious limits on what we can know and say about God, and all our beliefs that take the form of some sort of description of God, even our like the most minimal belief that there is a God to whom we are committed, like it all violates the Rambam's negative theology at least a little bit. So you have to be willing to at least put a little bit of an asterisk over it. Paradoxically, not believing in this sense can only function in tandem with believing. This is what I was trying to get at before, without which it would simply become simple negation, nothingness, simple absence rather than absence that exists. This is the revelation of the ayin. The ayin is invoking the idea from Kabbalah of that somehow God has a real sort of a mode of existence that is ayin, that is nothingness, but it's not just nothing. It's somehow the nothing that's even more real than existence. But because of the dramatic contrast with our existence, and this is the basic idea underlying Tzimtzum, underlying the idea that God had to withdraw from a space in order to create something other than God, is that somehow there's a fundamental incompatibility between God and something other than God, and therefore you end up with the idea of the ayin, that because of the great incompatibility, it seems that God has some manifestation that seems to us like nothingness. But on the practical level, he says again, not believing in this sense can only function in tandem with believing. It's not this possibility for a powerful fear of heaven. It's not emunah that Rav Shagar is looking for if you just don't believe, right? You can't say, oh, I just doubt God exists and therefore I'm a follower of Rav Shagar, basically. So, you have to contain your doubt alongside your emunah. You have to be able to hold those two things together. Like we said before, seeing with both your eyes at once. Yeah, Ellie.
Do you think if anyone were 100% intellectually honest with themselves, they would come to a different conclusion than Rav Shagar? Meaning, maybe it's trying to justify my own sekos at times, but I just feel like that's so what the experience of faith is, and I guess I don't understand anybody that never has fakos, but it almost feels like if you're almost just kind of acting as if they're not there because it's just more comfortable. I don't know, maybe that's too cynical, but that's my experience.
Right. So I am with you. I totally identify with what you're feeling. It feels crazy to say anything other than what Rav Shagar is saying right now, basically, on some level. But also, uvda, it's a fact that people do people disagree with Rav Shagar from a variety of perspectives. I'm more on the ideological level and sort of what we saw last week in terms of proving. You find the Aish seminars and stuff they do very strongly opposed, and then what we oppose to Rav Shagar here is much more Me'eshilach, and the idea that God might really want you to violate halacha and stuff. You could tell by what you're feeling inside, without ever without doubting it. And the Me'eshilach, his whole conception of not actually a Avera Lishma. He used that word before, but he doesn't like Avera Lishma. Rav Tzadok, his student, uses Avera Lishma. Me'eshilach never uses it. He uses it once to describe the Meraglim who he's criticizing, but otherwise he talks about Eit lahasot laHashem, hafer Torah techa. It's a time to act for God. You should violate God's Torah. That he thinks you can, through the process of birur, of clarifying yourself, you can strip away your own biases, your own desires, and come to a pure inner truth that God is communicating to you in your soul, and act based on that, and it's perfect. And that's exactly what Rav Shagar is going against right now. Rav Shagar is saying no, you should always be, you can never feel super certain about your beliefs. You have to be at least a little critical. Okay, it's 2:18. So Ellie, I need you to go 2:20. Any final questions?
I think you froze, Rev. What'd you say?
I said it's 2:18, and Ellie, I know you said you have to go at 2:20. So
yeah,
happy to do final questions, and we can
in a few minutes.
Yeah, we can hit sources 3 and 4 next week.
Yeah. This is deep stuff. It's right?
Yeah. This is
Can
this
you,
is my favorite step to do.
yeah. I guess like I'll probably send you a voice recording later because I'm still thinking about the purple versus green. Hasn't
Mhm.
fully registered, but yeah, it's
Oh yeah, I'm
yeah.
happy
So
to respond.
okay, awesome. All right, thanks,
Rob.
Rav. I guess we'll be in touch, and hopefully we could
Yeah,
do it in person sooner than later.
hopefully. All right.
Okay.